this is an interesting part of this whole campaign, obviously, is RFK Jr. and who he potentially helps or hurts. And we've been doing this podcast now, what, about I think 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months. And it seems like for most of it, when you're looking at polling, that RFK Jr. was hurting Biden by about 2 points, I'd say is fair over the course of the last 4 or 5 months as we've been discussing this. And so now I'm reading from this Hill article, but the headline is RFK Jr. swings edge to Biden in key battleground states from this poll here, which is Main Street Research, Polcom Lab, and Florida Atlantic. So now we're seeing a little bit of a switch here, and I'll just read a couple here. So basically, we're talking battleground states um, that Trump has a slight lead over Biden head to head in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. But when RFK Jr. is added to the mix, Biden takes the lead in the states, according to this poll. I think this is interesting. And I know that the Kennedys, it's obviously this great Democrat family for years and years and years. But when I think about the folks who like RFK Jr., and this is kind of a YouTube podcast thing, but I think of the red pill group. You know what I'm saying? You always hear that from the Matrix, like the people who, and I'm just bringing up Aaron Rodgers, but like Aaron Rodgers and a lot of people who have big time podcasts, a lot of these folks love RFK Jr. and they like what he stands for and some of the anti-vax stuff and really railing against COVID. So if this poll is accurate, it really doesn't surprise me that much because I feel like a lot of those people that I just described lean more conservative.
RFK Jr. is maybe the person who will decide this election, even though we know he is not going to win. And the reason for that is there are so many people who do not like both Trump and Biden. I mean, these are 2016 levels of people who didn't like at that time Trump and Hillary. It's in some polls it's almost 20% who really don't like either. And a lot of them, I think, at least temporarily, are parking their support in RFK. I saw a poll the other day that 50% of the RFK Jr. voters say that they are at least somewhat likely to change their mind. And that to me tracks. I think a lot of the RFK support, not all of it, there are true believers, of course, is people who just don't like Biden or Trump and are pissed off that this is their choice and are hoping that someone comes along on either the Republican or Democratic side to replace them. And I think they're just kind of parking their support with RFK Jr. And that's why I've said before, I think his support will fade as you get closer, particularly in the states that matter. And there's a couple key questions with RFK. First of all, is he on the ballot in the states that matter? We don't know that yet. I assume he will be because he's raised a lot of money. I think Michigan, they've already said that they've qualified. We'll find out over the next few months. So I'm assuming he will be. But that's the first thing, because if he's not on the ballot, then of course this conversation doesn't really matter. But his impact is so unique because of, you're right, where he's positioned on the political spectrum. A couple of years ago, it was clear he was mostly a Democrat. He's always been a Democrat. His last name's Kennedy. He was an environmental lawyer. He was running in the Democratic primary. But what you saw over the last several years, even before he left the Democratic primary to become an independent and run as an independent, he was getting more love in the right-wing media. And a lot of it was because of COVID. He became a star, not because he was an environmental lawyer, but because of what he said about COVID. A lot of it disinformation, right? But his anti-vax campaign, that played very well in among conservative media. And that is where he kind of took off. And so because of that, it's hard to tell where his support is going to come from. If you look at national polling right now, according to Real Clear Politics, Trump is ahead head-to-head against Biden by 0.5, which is the range that it's been in for a long time, with RFK Jr. in the mix, and also Jill Stein, the Green Party nominee, and Cornel West, who's also running as an independent. Five-way race. Trump's ahead by about 2 to 3 points. So that would lead you to believe that the larger field benefits Trump. And I think that is true. But I say I think because, as you pointed out, this polling was very interesting in the three states that matter the most, the blue wall states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Biden was behind or even head to head in this poll you cited from Main Street, USA, and Florida Atlantic, but past Trump when Kennedy was involved. So that is an interesting thing that, and you see Trump kind of attacking Kennedy more and more. And I think that's going to continue as we get closer to the election because it's really unclear exactly what impact he will have. But I will say this in general, the more that these third party and independent candidates attract, I think on a net basis, it helps Trump. It's not a given, it's not a guarantee, but if, and the way that I look at it is we've seen Trump run two national elections, 2016 and 2020. They were very different in a couple of ways. First of all, as I mentioned, in 2016, there was a huge number of people who didn't like Hillary and Trump. That wasn't the case in 2020. By 2020, a lot of the Trump people, Republicans, had come around to supporting him,
Mhm.
and the Democrats were very happy by and large with Biden. He won the nomination and then he courted the left, the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens. So there was a very low percentage of people who didn't like both Biden and Trump in 2020. Fast forward to 2024, we've reverted back to 16. And of course, remember, Trump won in 16 and he didn't win in 20. And the other way that this election feels to me more like 16 than 20 is I mentioned this before. In 2016, Trump and Hillary combined for about 94% of the vote. 6% went to independents, third parties, write ins. In 2020, it was less than 2% went to third parties, independents, write in. Biden and Trump got almost all the vote. If you look at the polling right now, and it's all over the place, Jill Stein and Cornel West are each getting 1% or so, and nationally, 1 or 2%. And Kennedy's getting, I mean, in some polls it's 5%, in some polls it's 15. He's averaging 9 in the latest Real Clear Politics average. So 9 and then maybe 3 between West and Stein. That's 12%. If third party independents and write-in are getting 10 to 15%, I'm not saying Biden can't win in that environment, but I'm saying that environment favors Trump to me because Trump, high floor, low ceiling. That's what he is. And the more people that peel away any extra votes make it to me this election more like 2016 where he won than 2020 where he lost.
Yeah, it's funny you talked about who could be the RFK Jr. voters. And like, I'll just tell you about my household. So my wife grew up conservative. I grew up a Democrat. I truly believe my wife would leave me right now for RFK Jr. That's she 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 watches and listens to every RFK Jr. podcast. I mean, just nonstop. I like RFK Jr. Now, does that mean I agree with everything he says about everything going back 40 years? Absolutely not. But I really like his message. His message seems to be much more unifying than Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I think the two-party system is destroying this country. So I think big picture, I would like to have more people like RFK have an actual shot. I don't really think RFK Jr. has a shot this year. But so that's what I'm saying. You have my wife who grew up Republican and I grew up Democrat. Neither of us are happy with the candidates from the two established parties. I've said I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I think he tried to overturn the election. I did vote for Joe Biden in 2020. I now feel like he is too old. I don't like what he's done on the border, but mostly I just can't feel good about casting a ballot for somebody knowing that he's already deteriorating and then he's going to be president till age 86. I just don't feel comfortable with that. So for me, I'm most likely right now to either not vote for anybody for president, but I am giving RFK Jr. a look. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote for him, but like I'm interested. Now, you and I a couple months ago or whenever, we had a little gentleman's bet. I don't even know if we bet anything, but we said, hey, at the time, RFK Jr. was polling around 10. And I said, if he gets in the debates, I bet you that pushes to 15. I bet you he gets close to Ross Perot numbers. So they're squeezing him out of the debates, though. And that's the thing. If he's not going to be in the debates, I think that number is going to go down, like you said. But truly, if he had a fair shot with 3 debates against Trump and Biden, I think that RFK Jr. would show really, really well on that debate stage. I think he'd look like the adult against the elderly patient and then the child who Trump is, because he acts like a baby. But I don't think we're going to get that opportunity. So I do think RFK Jr., he's going to have less of an impact because of those reasons. I don't think he's going to get a fair shake.
You're right. I mean, the two-party system is a monopoly. I don't like the way our presidential elections are conducted for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think the electoral college is antiquated and dumb. I prefer ranked choice voting. I've said that before. I think it would transform our elections at the federal level. I think every state should go to ranked choice voting for the House and Senate and even for the presidency, although I recognize that constitutionally and logistically that would be a nightmare. But I agree with you. I want more choice. I think anything that makes this not a Trump Biden contrast is in general good for Trump. And I think RFK Jr., any kind of outside party, third party, independent, that helps, I think, on net Trump because, again, he has a ceiling. And Biden needs to make it a contrast. I think what will happen with RFK Jr., assuming he doesn't get in the debates, which, as you said, looks like the most likely outcome right now. I think there is still a sliver of a chance that he could qualify if he starts polling very, very well. I think he's got to get to 15% in several national polls, but unlikely to happen. I think he will fade in the states that matter. And that's look, this we don't have a federal election. This year we have a 6-state election. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. And also, by the way, what might decide it, Omaha, Nebraska. Nebraska's second congressional district, which is one electoral vote, which very well may be the difference in this election, by the way. I mean, Omaha, Nebraska may decide this thing. That's where the election is. It's those 6 states in Omaha, Nebraska. And so it doesn't matter what RFK Jr. does in Pennsylvania, or I'm sorry, in California or Texas or Florida. It matters what he does in Omaha, Nebraska, and those other 6 states.
Yeah. And this gets back to we've had this conversation before, so I'll be short about it. But I do think it's easier for somebody like me in Missouri, where my vote really doesn't matter, to not vote for president or vote for RFK Jr. Whereas if you live in one of those 6 states, I think you're much more likely to really focus on Trump or Biden, the two guys that actually matter. Again, it doesn't matter if you're voting in freaking West Virginia or California. It really doesn't matter. Like California's going to go big blue, West Virginia is going to go big red. So you can do the I don't want to vote, I'm going to go third party. I don't like either option. But again, if I lived in Michigan, which I've lived in 3 times, I would have a different outlook on the election because you can make the case in those 6 states that you really are deciding this election.
Absolutely. And I think this election I think is going to be decided not by the base, not by the turnout, because I think both sides will turn out. But I think it's going to be decided by that very large percentage of voters who don't like either candidate, who continue in these primaries that happen to vote uncommitted or vote for Nikki Haley on the Republican side or Marianne Williams on the Democrat side. The people like you and I to some extent are like this, uh, who don't really like these choices. But most likely they are the choices. And I think people are parking their support right now. Not everybody, like there are true believers like your wife and others, but I think a large chunk of RFK Jr. are people who are just kind of like, RFK Jr.
Yeah. And he's interesting. And
He is.
it's weird because for a guy who's a Kennedy, I still feel like most of the country knows less about him than Trump and Biden. It's just because Trump and Biden have both been presidents, and Biden's been around in politics for 50 years, and Trump's been around in business and apprentice for 40 years. And even though RFK Jr. is a Kennedy, like if you're not big into the YouTube and podcast world, you probably don't know that much about him. Again, he'll be on cable news every once in a while, but he's not your typical Kennedy. So for a guy who's I think close to 70 years old and he's a Kennedy, we still know a lot less about him than we do Trump and Biden. And I just think, yeah, so many people are just so tired of the two-party system. They're so tired of Trump and Biden that really anything different at least excites them or attracts them. And maybe they don't even vote for RFK Jr., but they like the idea of what RFK Jr. represents.